Some brief introductions, and I'll try to keep them brief because we have a really illustrious group up here with us tonight who have a long list of accomplishments and talents and interests to their name. But to my immediate right is Paul Patterson, and Paul and his partner Chelsea Gutierrez, who is unable to join us this evening, are co-directors of the Jewish Security Team for Southern Arizona. They are both retired TPD officers who have provided safety training, event and program security, and ears on the ground for our community since 2020. Next up is Rabbi Stephanie Aaron. Rabbi Aaron has led Congregation Havarim for over 35 years. She has also led several trips, over 16 years, to Poland and Israel on the journey we call the March of the Living. And she does this out of her dedication and belief that we must take a stand against prejudice, hatred, violence, bigotry, and discrimination. She is married to Dr. Jack Aaron and is the mother of 4 children and grandmother to 2. She is proud to be a 3rd generation and first woman Rotarian in her family, and she is a graduate of the University of Arizona. Among her many awards, Rabbi Aaron has been honored by Federation, the Jewish Federation for Southern Arizona, as a Young Woman of the Year and as a Professional of the Year. She has also received 2 Copper Letters of Commendation from the city of Tucson, and she was honored by the Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center for the body of her work, teaching and remembering the Shoah, which is Holocaust in Hebrew, and standing against anti-Semitism and racism of all kinds. Next up, Kelsey Jannerson, who is Assistant Director at Hillel, U of A Hillel at the University of Arizona. Kelsey relocated to Tucson in summer of 2022 after spending the previous 7 years in New Orleans, Louisiana. While in New Orleans, she studied natural disasters. I don't know if that was intentional or not. Worked with students at Tulane, ate a lot of Southern food, and took in a tremendous amount of experimental theater. She was deeply involved in the New Orleans Jewish community, including as a National Council for Jewish Women Fellow, religious school teacher, and J Pride NOLA committee member. Kelsey sits on the board of the University Religious Council as treasurer and is extremely excited to be working with students across campus to create interesting and memorable Jewish experiences. In her spare time, Kelsey enjoys reading, especially science fiction, hiking, and playing video games. Another guest from campus this evening is Dr. David Graysboard, who is Curson Professor of Judaic Studies and Director of the Arizona Center for Judaic Studies at the University of Arizona. He teaches courses on anti-Semitism, the Spanish Inquisition, and Jewish history from the Second Temple period to the modern era. His last book is entitled The New Zionists, Young American Jews, Jewish National Identity, and Israel. His forthcoming book is entitled Early Modern Jewish Civilization, Unity and Diversity in a Diasporic Society. And last but not least, we're thrilled to have Charlene Mendoza with us. After graduating from Johns Hopkins, Charlene returned to her hometown of Tucson to begin a career in education. She helped found Arizona College Prep Academy, a charter high school dedicated to creating, an inquiry-driven, reflective, and supportive learning environment. She taught literature and served as principal before leaving in 2019 to become Tucson Mayor Regina Romero's chief of staff. Charlene remains very active in the Tucson community with Planned Parenthood Advocates of Arizona, the Arizona List, Las Adelitas PAC, and other organizations, all affiliations that reflect her commitment to working towards real and meaningful representation that creates connections and builds power on local, state, and federal levels. Do you sense a theme? We have, like I said, a wonderful and really committed group of folks here tonight. After hearing from our speakers, there will be time for a Q&A. Please flag down one of our team members. I don't know if you want to stand or raise your hands. We have Lori, we have Martin, we have Ori here with us tonight. To get an index card, if you didn't get one at the door, to submit your questions. So we will be gathering questions and folks will bring them up here. Before we get started, I want to invite everyone to take a deep breath. We're here to talk about a pretty difficult subject tonight, and one that affects all of us, Jewish or not. Fighting anti-Semitism, along with all other forms of identity-based discrimination and violence, is a communal effort. And as we'll talk about tonight, it takes the participation of local, state, and national governments, law enforcement, educators, social service organizations, and individuals, and I'm sure I'm leaving something out of that equation. And you are commended for being here and for making this effort to both learn more and do more about this important issue. So thank you all, I really appreciate it. And again, be kind to yourself. You know, we are talking about some tough stuff, and if you need to get up and take a breath, that's fine too. So without further ado, Paul, anti-Semitism is everywhere in the news these days. If you are familiar with the ADL's hate report, the Anti-Defamation League, they have found an increase, I believe 2022 are the most recent numbers, the greatest number of anti-Semitic incidents since they started tracking them in the late 1970s. The year before that was the previous highest number of anti-Semitic incidents since they started tracking them in the 1970s. And this is something that crosses, you know, social media, schoolyards, halls of power, all of the above. That's sort of the national landscape, and we invited Paul to talk about what that looks like in Tucson and Southern Arizona.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay, great. The way that looks in Southern Arizona versus the national landscape, it looks exactly the same. We see a lot of the same problems. We see a lot of the same incidents occurring, but we may not see the same level of frequency. And there can be a lot of reasons why we would look at that. First and foremost, I'd like to think that we just have a good conglomeration of people in Southern Arizona, and we're a lot more tolerant, and we're a lot better at understanding people, and we're happy to be around people. That's the kind of the pie in the sky type of an answer. But especially when it relates to anti-Semitism, it could have some other factors as well. It wasn't that long ago that Chelsea and I hosted a security director from another location. And his first question was like, well, I think I wanted to come and see your Federation building, and then maybe we can take a tour of one of your Jewish neighborhoods. And I'm like, really? That's going to be a long drive. And for a boy born and raised in Tucson, Arizona, I wouldn't have a clue as to where that Jewish neighborhood starts. However, having a lot of friends from around the country in different places, and a lot of what I've learned after becoming one of the Jewish community security directors, is that in different parts of the country, there are very specific Jewish neighborhoods. There are very specific areas. So if that is the case, it becomes very easy to become a target. So some of our landscape may just be our personnel and our people. Some of it may be the reality of the way we live. We just don't have the same centralized thought process that might make it a target, if that's one way to put it. So I think our landscape is the same, but our frequency is dramatically different.
Thank you. One of the ways in which that behavior, I guess, manifests, you know, over the last year, we've seen several instances of what's called flyering or graffiti, and I'll let you maybe explain that a little bit, but actions that are specifically designed not to rise to the level of engaging law enforcement. And one of the things that we talk about in the community is we encourage, you know, homeowners, residents to not amplify that activity, to not share on social media, to not talk about what they've seen. But can you talk about maybe what a community-based response could look like or should look like to acts of hate?
Sure. One of the big things about anything in dealing with acts of hate is that it's disturbing, and people get these flyers. If you're not familiar with how this flyering incident type thing takes place, there are hate groups out there who put together a lot of anti-Semitic flyers, a lot of hate speech in them. They put them in Ziploc baggies, fill them with some sort of beans or rocks or something. They just drive through neighborhoods and they throw them out the window. Generally speaking, this is all happening 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. We've actually been able to identify some time frames based off of people's home surveillance cameras and things of that nature. But they're very careful to make sure that they're not exposed doing this. There's a reason why they don't want to be exposed doing it, because there's problems associated with that, and there's consequences to all of those things. But spreading that level of hatred is still disturbing to anybody in the neighborhood who picks those things up, looks at them, and goes, oh my gosh, this is horrible. And one of the things that we have found in looking at this is there's a lot of ways we could look at this. We could do what we consider the shine the bright spotlight on hatred and say that we're not going to tolerate it. We could contact the news media. We could put those things out there on social media, and we could condemn it all in social media. But we'd encourage people to look at exactly what they are doing with that. You're talking about a small percentage of the population. You're talking about a small percentage of people who don't have access to spreading their word. But as soon as they put it out on as soon as it gets put out on social media by somebody else, it grows, and it grows quickly. If you put it on my social media, you reach 25 people maybe. I'm not a big social media guy. There's some of you that probably have thousands of followers. So a flyer that would have reached 30 people, maybe, in an incident, gets put on social media, and suddenly it could reach thousands in minutes, maybe tens of thousands in a matter of a half an hour, or even much broader. And so our theory has been we have catapulted that small percentage of people who may see it suddenly to a large percentage of people who may have seen it. So we're trying to take the oxygen out of the fire, so to speak, by not giving a larger platform to someone who doesn't have a large platform. It's a strategy that we feel has been working. There haven't been very many flyering incidents in recent months. Most of the time that we are getting these flyers brought to our attention, it's because a non-Jewish person has got one of these flyers and contacted the JCC or the Federation or the museum and said, hey, this really bad thing happened and we don't know what to do. We're thinking about going to the media. And all those resources end up saying, why don't you call our security directors and we're going to get you over there. And Chelsea and I try and get there generally as quick as we possibly can. We've gotten to some of these incidents where we've actually been able to pick up 20 or 30 of these flyers. And that even diminished the number of people it reached then. We were fortunate enough to go to an event at the Hillel after speaking to a neighborhood association. Because when we talked to the director of the neighborhood association, they're like, we didn't know what to do. So we said, why don't we come out and talk at one of your next neighborhood association meetings? We'll be happy to kind of spread the word a little bit, tell you a little bit about us and how we can help and things of that nature. So Chelsea and I did that. It was a great experience for us. And then there was an incident at the Hillel, and the homeowners association director, who is not Jewish, shows up and says, you know, you've been very supportive to help in our community, so we want to be supportive to help yours. And we're here just to be part. You know, that's, so for us, we're thinking maybe not the bright light of hatred, more the extinguish the light of hatred as quickly as we can. And maybe that might be the better learning curve.
Thank you very much. Rabbi Aaron, you are a congregational rabbi, and you're a faith leader, you're a confidant, you're a leader of people, and many of whom you've been part of their families for generations. Can you give us a sense of how your congregation feels in this current climate? I mean, does Paul's assessment match what you're hearing in your community?
I just turned. Hello? All right. Can you hear me? Okay, good. So I'd love to say that his assessment meets what we've experienced, but sadly, it's not true, actually. However, Paul has been amazing in helping some of the things that happen. So in 57, 83, for us, it was a very challenging year because several of the young people, so I'm going to disguise this, but tell this story. Several young people in our synagogue went from, when I was first a rabbi at this synagogue, and I've been in Tucson many years, often what would happen there would be horrible, in quotes, jokes about Jews and ovens, Jews and pizza and ovens. You can kind of imagine it, and not funny. And I would hear, kids would come to me and say this was said at school, and different things like that. And then this year was such a broad escalation of that. Basically, it went from, in particular, two students in two different schools went from being called dirty Jew and the K word and Heil Hitlered for months, and then were attacked. And Paul helped incredibly, and but it went on for months, and both of the Jewish kids, one responded by just sort of oh no, that's not very nice, don't say that, why don't you stop saying that, I don't like that, and then it just was never going to, I don't think, with the individual to stop until the individual attacked the kid. And so then it was a very big escalation. The other one, the Jewish kid, let it go for a few months and then just got into a fight with the kid that was, doing this. And what really upset me more than anything, I think, is that, first of all, the K word. Most of the time it's dirty Jew, but like the K word, it sounds more like a little bit more historical, and you want to know, how does this kid, this, a teen, where do these kids hear this? So obviously it must be, and Heil Hitler, and Hitler was right, and reopened the death camps, and it just went on. And so it was a very difficult experience, of course, for the families, clearly, and for the kids. I'm calling them kids, just not to, because they weren't really children, but that was very difficult this year. And prior to that, I think in terms of the congregation, what it feels like. We had swastikas put on our, first of all, our congregation, you could just approach it from any angle, just walk right in, pretty much. And so there were swastikas that had been painted, and so we got rid of them. Then the front door was smashed in, and the big, huge rock was thrown through, boulder. And so now we have security, which, of course, Paul helped with, but it's like a cage in the front now. It feels really awful, I have to admit. And we were just discussing that every time we have services in Hebrew school and Beit Midrash on Sundays, we have to have an armed person there. And we were just discussing that, Paul and I. And it just feels very much more like we're on alert. Like sometimes I feel like I'm on high alert, and that it's very disturbing. It's very disturbing. And I would say this, but I wouldn't have it any other way because I would never not be on high alert at this point.
Okay. Test, okay. So Kelsey, to you, and what does campus look like? I know that it's been about a year now, right, since Dr. Thomas Meissner was murdered on campus. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. I think most people locally are aware, but may not know that it happened on Rosh Hashanah and that it happened very close to the Hillel building, et cetera. So I'll let you speak to that. But that incident and the broader campus climate, what do you hear from students?
Yes. Can everyone hear me? All right, great. So the murder of Thomas Meixner happened on Yom Kippur, and that was a year ago as of October 5th in a few days. And so I'd kind of like to divide comments into what surrounds the campus climate with regard to the murder of Dr. Meixner, and then with what the general state of campus is in terms of the way that students are processing and dealing with anti-Semitism when they encounter it on campus. And so with regard to the murder of Dr. Thomas Meixner, I believe that many people in here are already very aware of many of the details, but in general, Dr. Meixner was actually a Catholic professor who was under threat by a student who had engaged in anti-Semitic and many other hateful conspiracy theories over a period of months with very poor university response with regard to security. There were multiple after the reports came out, we found out that another professor had been wearing a bulletproof vest to work in the prior months, and just things that actually really surprised me because there were many things that were very difficult in New Orleans, but the one thing that Tulane was good at was dealing with disaster stuff. And so with all of that, that really has put us on high alert, especially around holidays, because the murder of Dr. Meixner took place on Yom Kippur when we had students in the building, and we had to make a decision without good university information about what to do with our students and how to take care of them and how to keep them safe. And so luckily, and also unfortunately, like Rabbi Aaron said, like we have security at all of our large events because things like this can and evidently do happen. And so in that case, we actually had to ask students to leave and cancel the rest of Yom Kippur services. And I would just like to point out that we were one of 3 Jewish organizations on campus holding services that day, and the only campus organization who was going to receive any kind of emergency intel at all, because other Jewish organizations on campus are operating within Orthodox law and are not getting those cell phone alerts. And so all of that should be kept in mind. In the aftermath of that, one of the things that our previous executive director, Jessica Emerson McCormick, set up was the beginnings of a campus council on the prevention and action on anti-Semitism. And so that's something I'm currently working on with our new interim executive director, Jennifer Camano, as well as with university administration, as they're currently now reworking their diversity and inclusion office. And so we are in meetings with them right now about the best next steps to take. Now, in terms of the day-to-day life of college students, because I was talking to our visiting rabbi who we have for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and we were talking about how that horrible thing happened, but other than that, like the rest of the high holidays last year were really, really nice. But the 2 things that our students worry about the most, I would say, are cyberbullying and microaggressions. And those 2 things go hand in hand, and they're often overlapped. And so with what our students are dealing with, they often deal with it from a politicized angle of intercepting commentary for students from Justice in Palestine and other associated groups. And it's never about a political, and this has nothing to do with the political conversation about the geopolitical issues at hand, but rather it's being used in many cases to target our students in terms of their Jewish identity. I often talk about how many parts of my job are the little things, like I need to stop at the synagogue to go pick up the lulav and etrog that I ordered, and I need to go make sure that we have gluten-free challah. And then there are the really big things, putting on entire programs, getting people from place to place, taking students on large trips, and dealing with anti-Semitism on campus. And sometimes those very big things and those very small things unfortunately overlap. Even recently, the very tiny things, this year on Yom Kippur, it's the silliest little thing, but there's a very small Instagram account called Campus Frogs that leaves little stuffed frogs around campus for students to find. And I contacted them and was like, hey, it would be really nice if you left a frog here. Our students would be delighted. And so they very kindly reached back out to me and were like, yes, we'd love to do that. We'll leave a little frog. We'll name him Jonah and he can come join y'all for the breakfast on Yom Kippur. Again, silly little college things. But then what happens is the people on this little account put up their post, and then the first 3 comments before Yom Kippur is even over are, oh, you should leave one with Students for Justice in Palestine next. This post has nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do with Israel. It is people who decided to be good allies to us in understanding that this was an important time and bringing a little bit of joy to our students. So the fact that there are people in the campus community who are comfortable at this point saying no the objective of this post is to make people feel bad on the holiest day of the year is deeply problematic and a really big issue with campus culture. And I think especially with the internet, it's often very visible that things feel very bad very quickly because it's, again, very easily amplified. Just as Paul was speaking to the fact that if a person's neighborhood gets flyered and then that goes on social media to the right person, suddenly that multiplies, and the act of that internet engagement itself is an act of terrorizing Jewish people and other marginalized identities. And so, all that to say, on the day-to-day, things are nice, things are fine, and we have fun, we have a good time. We have joyful Shabbat every week, and we've been able to celebrate Jewish culture, we've been able to celebrate Israeli culture in really nice ways. But we've had students who have gotten cyberbullied. We've had students whose intersectional identities are very difficult to navigate because they are needing to figure out how to be Jewish and then also exist in political spheres that push up against that, or maybe have normalized anti-Semitic rhetoric without realizing it fully. And there's a lot of work to be done. And so, like I said earlier, we're currently in contact with the university's new Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and we're cautiously optimistic that we can get a lot done with them. But at the end of the day, one of the things that people have really forgotten about, and I think especially within youth culture, is the sanctity of community. Because with the internet, and I say this as someone who very much, I don't get Gen Z credentials, but I at least get the millennial. I grew up with the AOL dial tone. People lose their sense of what does community mean? What does it mean to respect and honor each other's cultures and traditions and religious backgrounds when it's so easy to type something awful and then forget about it and go on with your day? And it takes more than us. It takes the whole University of Arizona community, the Tucson community, the Hillel community, et cetera, to really create an environment that's friendly to students being able to express themselves and their Judaism, no matter what that Judaism looks like for them.
So much. Thank you. Dr. Graysboard, you get to see campus from a slightly different angle. Your focus as a professor is on, well, not anti-Semitism from the Second Temple to modern times, but the scope of your work encompasses that time frame. Have you had a need to revise your curriculum or teachings on these subjects? Has it changed at all or greatly in the last couple of years?
First of all, thank you for having me. Unlike these very intelligent people, I don't extemporize very well, so I kept some notes. I may be referring to them. The answer to your question is no. Fundamentally, my syllabi have remained the same. That's largely because the forms that anti-Jewish animosity takes these days and the content of the animosity, the specific canards and so forth, these have been around for a long time, in some cases for decades, in some cases even for centuries. So the curriculum is basically the same. What has changed, though, is the degree to which people openly articulate anti-Jewish animosity and the degree to which their intended or unintended audiences seem to accept anti-Jewish discourse as unproblematic, unremarkable, as a normal part of social discourse. And, we live, of course, in a time of the proliferation of various conspiracy theories and very vulgar and often very violent rhetoric. What's also changed is the degree to which anti-Jewish animosity metastasizes in public discourse. And one concern is that it not only metastasizes in or among people that we might readily categorize as radical left or radical right. Rather, it tends to also metastasize even among people who are, quote, in the mainstream, who are, quote unquote, respectable. As an example, there's a very popular phrase out there these days, Jewish supremacism or suprematism. Both words work. This is an anti-Jewish phrase that was, if not coined, then certainly popularized by David Duke. As probably all of you know, David Duke cut his teeth as an officer of the KKK. He was some sort of wizard or lizard, or I mean, they have interesting titles, these guys. But he coined the phrase Jewish suprematism or Jewish supremacy and its cognates to basically to identify what he and others like him consider to be the objective of Jews in the world. Now, one matter of concern is that nowadays this phrase has become generalized so that even some of my colleagues in Judaic studies, not in the U of A, mind you, but in national fora, at the international level even, now use the phrase Jewish suprematism as a matter of course. And they usually do it when they're talking about Israel and Zionism. Now, as far as I can tell, many of these colleagues who use the phrase are doing it because they wish to feel good. They wish to feel virtuous. They wish to indicate that they are politically and socially responsible. Now, by using this phrase, not everyone that employs it is, at least I don't think, is trying to say that Jews want to control the world. Many professors, for example, use Jewish suprematism to refer to the political ideologies that fuel the political parties, some political parties that now form part of the Israeli governing coalition. In particular, the party of Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. This, of course, the fact that these two men and their parties form part of the Israeli government nowadays is very convenient for anti-Semites. But leaving that aside, the problem is that self-styled, progressive, responsible professors who use terms like Jewish suprematism are doing so alongside much more radical people, even some of their own colleagues. And these more radical people actually do think that the state of Israel as a whole, by its very nature, is an affront to human rights. They think that Zionism is by its very nature something that necessitated, that required, in fact, was a kind of conspiracy to deprive Arabs of property and dignity, and very often life. This, by the way, is historically false. You can see a lot of radicals in all kinds of nationalisms, but it doesn't necessarily tar the nationalisms with this very broad brush. So these radicals are people who think that the state of the Jewish people should be abolished. That should be at least reconfigured in such a way that the Jewish majority there unconditionally surrenders its basic interests, or some such, surrenders these interests to its enemies on the altar of, paradoxically enough, human rights.
Thank you. There's a lot to unpack there, and I'll give a short pitch for the last lecture of this series in January that will address those issues a little more. Charlene, you've had an opportunity to hear from leaders from our local Jewish community. Can you give us a sense of what you're hearing at the city or regional or state or national level on anti-Semitism and how what we've heard here tonight might fit into the broader conversation?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me here tonight. I think I'll start on the national level, which is ironic for me in some ways because our local politics and the residents and Tucsonans here experience in different ways, but I think it's good framing. At the national level, under the Biden administration, there have been two large statements where they have made official policies against anti-Semitism. It takes me back, I think we all experienced, I'm sure in our own ways, in Charlottesville, a way that anti-Semitism came to the national stage in a way that was very different. I think it made it a way that people were willing to acknowledge and accept, something that maybe before was a little quieter, a little bit more hidden, or a local issue became something that was very loud and in fact very proud for a number of people in our communities and across the country. So I do think that that is something that the federal government and President Biden has taken seriously. Most recently, a number of departments have been charged with the task of creating particular policies to deal with anti-Semitism. So everything from the Department of Justice to the Department of Transportation are looking at opportunities to educate and to create opportunities for people to learn about how to not be anti-Semitic, how to support people who are experiencing anti-Semitism, and to create opportunities for people to be able to report and get support more easily. For example, the Small Business Administration is in fact working to say to business owners, here's what you can do if somebody in your store, in your shop is experiencing anti-Semitism. Because one of the things I think, to bring it hyper-local for a moment, is that most people don't even know how to name it. I think that we're talking in this regard as people who understand and have, in many cases, experienced anti-Semitism. We know the words, we know the jokes, we know the ways that people talk about it. But I think for a lot of people in the general public, they don't know that it's anti-Semitic because they've only heard it from the perspective of being the person in the room and maybe thinking, well, maybe that doesn't feel quite right, but I'm gonna laugh because it's a joke. So I think locally, one of the things that we're working on is a lot of education. Asking this question to a number of people in preparation for tonight, our city attorney, our chief of police, they wanna automatically talk about hate crimes and say, well, if it escalates this way or if it happens that way, it becomes a hate crime and we know what to do. And I think that's one of the things I think about a lot. When it escalates, we all know what to do. The problem for me is how do we handle the things that we've been hearing here tonight, which is when it's not quite escalated enough to cause people to act in a way that has been created either through law or ordinance or some kind of resolution that tells us what to do. For example, one of our neighborhood parks about 6 months ago had just experienced a brand new, they got new playground equipment, new bathrooms, more trees were planted. There was a great big celebration. This was in Ward 3, so right around Glen and Campbell. Most of the time, people would think this is a pretty safe place. It's a pretty nice park. That's a place where, little kids, like the under 5-year-olds, play soccer, and they're all really cute, chasing the ball around. A couple of weeks after that park was refurbished and had this ribbon cutting, it was graffitied with anti-Semitic markings all over the bathrooms and playground equipment. And it was one of those times where it became a question, how do we handle it? Is it a parks issue? Is it the anti-graffiti abatement team issue? And we end up having to have these conversations where we need to move quickly. And this is just an example of, I think, similar to the flyering. You don't want to post it on social media. You don't want people to know about it to the extent that that may encourage them to replicate. But I think for the community itself and for the kids, it's so personally painful in very similar kinds of ways as Rabbi Aaron was speaking about. I think the last part I will add at the moment is that in a lot of cases, the education piece is so important. I think at the City of Tucson, Mayor Romero, Councilmember Santa Cruz, and the council did vote to approve an Office of Equity for the first time in the City of Tucson. And I think we all have a lot of expectations of what that office should be able to do immediately. I'm impatient too, but I do think that bringing to bear the idea that we need to have something in city government that's intended to address some of these issues from a perspective of education and engagement, from a perspective of data analysis that isn't only seen through the lens of, is it bad enough to be a hate crime, I think is very hopeful to me. So I think overarchingly, the challenge I think our governments face, whether it's local, state, or federal, is exactly this issue, which is as individuals, we experience anti-Semitism on a regular basis. When it's identifiable, as Rabbi Aaron was talking about, Congregation Chavarim is not the only congregation that has been vandalized, and we can take care of it in that particular case. We can prosecute vandalism. We can try to provide security support for people who are in these places. But my question still remains, how is it that we educate our citizens and our residents to change this culture that is not only anti-Semitic, but is also in many cases homophobic or anti-Muslim? So I know that we're talking here about anti-Semitism, and that's different. I'm not saying that it's the same as the others, but I think there is a culture of tolerance of those words, jokes, and behaviors that we need to change. I'm hopeful the Office of Equity is a step in that direction.
Thank you very much. Before we move on to questions, and I just want to sort of frame something Charlene said, when she's talking about different offices of the federal government, all those initiatives come under the relatively new U.S. national strategy on anti-Semitism that the Biden White House announced back in May. There is it's 60 pages long if you want to read it, and it is pretty interesting, but there is a one-pager available online, and we have some resources to share with you later this evening, and I'll make sure that that's part of what shows up on our website, because the one-pager is great. But the 4 pillars of that strategy are increasing awareness and understanding of anti-Semitism, right? You can't fight it if you don't know what it is, including its threat to America, and to broaden the appreciation of Jewish American heritage, to improve safety and security for Jewish communities, to reverse the normalization of anti-Semitism and counter anti-Semitic discrimination, and to build cross-community solidarity and collective action to counter hate. And so I think that, that national strategy echoes a lot of what we're hearing here tonight, that there is an educational piece, that there is a cross-community or knowing your neighbor piece, or as we say in the JCRC field, working on areas of common concern with other faith groups, other cultural groups, other race groups, because if you don't know your neighbors and if you're not showing up for your neighbors, in, like Kelsey mentioned, in their time of need, who's going to show up for you? Anything that I didn't ask that you'd like to talk about before we move to questions? Yes.
I just wanted to acknowledge something that you said, and also I really shared with you some of the most obvious and horrible things that happened, but some of the more subtle things that happened that I've noticed this year is one of the members of my synagogue, followed by several more young males who decided not to have bar mitzvahs, and in private conversation with me said it's because they don't want people to know they're Jewish at their schools. And when the other things that happened, I talk about it with kids all the time, and another kid said to me, well, I haven't experienced anti-Semitism in my school. So I said, well, I know some other kids at your school that have. Why do you think that is? And he said, Rabbi, I make sure no one knows I'm Jewish. Now, you're talking about kids who are identified in a synagogue. They're Jewish. They're not like people out there that I don't know who they are. They're Jews out. These are Jews in a synagogue feeling that they can't actually show their identity. And the other thing that happened that was interesting to me, just again, what are kids going through, is that the first kid that for really basically a good 9 months was tormented before it escalated to physical violence, was another kid who knows him said to me, well, sometimes it's just trash talking. Like some of my friends will say, oh, you Jew or something or other, whatever. Well, I said, well, let me just ask you something. If you have a friend who's African American, are you going to trash talk him as an African American, like if he would trash talk you as a Jew, or would you actually do that? He goes, no. I said, well, then why do your friends feel like it's okay to jokingly, say something about you as a Jew, but you wouldn't do that to him to another person as an African American? And he just kind of looked at me and he said, I don't know, Rabbi. And I said, because it's racist. It's not right. So I think, I have all these teenagers and young people and having to experience anti-Semitism like this is just so frightening, and also it just is so appalling. And I think many of you know I have taken many teenagers to Poland to go to the camps. And why do we do that? Because basically the March of the Living, there's a pledge. And first it says never again for us. We're going to stand up, we're going to remember, we're going to be witnesses, like Elie Wiesel tells us, of blessed memory. We're going to do that, and we're going to do everything we can, not just for us, though. Part of the pledge is we will make sure this doesn't happen for any other group. That's us. To me, that's sort of the hope, the light that Paul was talking about in the darkness, that even we're light in the darkness because we refuse. We learn in our kitchens, we're like, we know what this feels like. This is horrible. We know what prejudice feels like. We know what discrimination feels like. We know what hatred feels like. So we don't want to allow it in our world. Not against us, not against anyone. And that's all.
Thank you. One of our first questions is, Charlene made a great point that we know what to do when anti-Semitism escalates, but not so much with smaller acts. How would other members of the panel tell us as individuals to make big differences on a personal level?
I'm happy to talk about what we do specifically at University of Arizona and where it works and where it doesn't. And so I got to take a very interesting trip over this last summer with Hillel International. They very kindly sent Hillel staff, no birthright, no students, just staff, across the country to Israel and to the Palestinian territories to have frank conversations about things that were happening on the ground. And it was co-facilitated by a Israeli facilitator and a Palestinian citizen of Israel facilitator. And one of the really great access points that we talked about was that this guy, Mohammed Darwashi, his specialty was peace studies. And so one of the things that sort of came up with that was sort of what we refer to as homos talks. Like what happens when you get two people with opposing views around food, and how does it impact them effectively, and where does that impact stop? And so what I think about a lot in my role is where are we doing so-called homos talks? Like where are we feeding people with different views and encouraging them to see each other as human? And where does that impact stop? And what we see is that really impacts the individuals quite a lot. And it can reframe how they are able to see each other and to see other people within their community. But what it does not do is change policy. And so, and where policy is important is where we see the university being able to report to us when they think that there are going to be problems, and us being able to report student behaviors that we see on the internet around bullying or consistent issues with our students running into microaggressions across campus, and them having a structural way to deal with that. So part of that is working again with the university and hoping that they can be good partners. And they came to the table last year saying, yes, we are very ready to be good partners. Though unfortunately that was precipitated by Dr. Meixner's murder. But then also with smaller things. It means that today I spent 2 hours of my job out on the mall next to Old Main and the Student Union giving away Sufgan Yot, even though it's not Hanukkah yet, to everybody. And inviting people to say, here, try our food, come learn about it, and let's talk to you. We are people, and you do not need to be Jewish in order to access this part of culture that is delightful. And so part of that goal is to say, we are here, we exist, and we're here to be a part of the fabric of your life. And part of the fabric of your life every Thursday, getting free dessert.
I just want to, is this on? No. What happened here? It looks like it, oh, there we go, okay. I think it takes a while to realize when it's trying to talk. I like a lot of what I hear. In fact, everything that I've heard is good. One thing I want to propose, not as a person who is about or into policy, but as a person who is about and you might say into culture. It is very good, certainly, to encourage people through direct contact and other means to get to know each other, to, I don't know, to recognize each other's humanity, to develop empathy and so forth. But I want to take a step back from that and say the following. A person who is an absolute jerk is deserving of the same respect as anybody else. Why do I say that? Because I should not have to prove to anyone that I'm very nice and that I'm human for them to treat me as I deserve to be treated because I'm a fellow human being. Absent measures through which we all get to hold hands and sing Kumbaya, I think what has to happen is that people who work on policy, who work on education, who work on the tactics of security, have got to incorporate a very important element into their work. And that is an articulation of what it means to have a society that is founded on respect, respect for the law, respect for rights, and certainly respect for differences, right? Let's say, for example, that I don't like people who wear red sweaters, right? Presumably, I'm not going to be mean to Ms. Mendoza, right? Because I have a sense that it is in our best interest not to, I don't know, not to arm wrestle about red sweaters. I don't have to agree with her that red sweaters are good. However, she can respect me, I can respect her. We don't have to love each other, in other words. We do have to have a common buy-in, a common commitment to certain rules of the game. I honestly don't care what anti-Semites think. I don't want to convert them. I cannot convert them. Many, many far smarter people than I have convinced me that anti-Jewish animus is very often an incurable disease. And by the way, it is not the responsibility of Jews to cure that disease. It is the responsibility of the cultures in which anti-Jewish animus tends to germinate. So there.
Thank you. I'm going to, this is maybe for Charlene and anyone who else wants to chime in, but I'm going to combine two questions here. I'll read it. Okay, so we've amply identified several incidents, occurrences in public places, schools. We're all compelled to build security cages around the entrance to our places of worship. We defend our safety and hire security forces so that our children and our congregants can safely practice their religion. But the virulent hate grows exponentially, fostered by daily political opponents' jokes, political opponents. Jokes lead to communal thoughts and further shore up belief systems. Name-calling, acts of violence are facilitated. How to reverse this, core community base that embraces hate for so many reasons. And I'm going to add to that, one of our first questions was, how is it possible that one can foment extremism, in a state house, legislature, and still maintain their position? So that's a lot.
Yes,
you,
I
my
think
friend.
that's a dissertation right there. There's a few ways that come to mind immediately. I do think, as I mentioned, for me, as a Jew, as a Latina, as a mom, Charlottesville brought together many things for me. And one of the things that I was thinking about when Rabbi Aaron was speaking is that for me, as a mom, the decision to enroll my kids in Hebrew school, the decision to make public in ways that I felt very comfortable for myself. But we run into these interesting issues with kids, right? Because they ideally are in a position to determine their identity and what they choose to share, but we as parents and people in society often make choices for them. So the reason I'm centering my answer there is that we live in a divided society. I often say to people who talk to me about both sides, I say both sides would be easy. The reality is that there are many, many, many sides, all who have a very particular perspective about a particular thing that is what drives them. I do think one of the things that I have learned as a teacher, as a mom, working with our mayor, is that we can't function when we focus on the difference. We would never in government get anything done, which often puts us in the position of having to settle for what I think is not good enough. What I would use as an example for that is we exist in a place where people have to be voted into office. So one of my first answers is we need people to register to vote. In the last mayoral election in 2019, we had a stronger turnout than we have almost ever seen in Tucson. Anybody want to guess the percent? 39. We typically, in an election like this year, where there aren't any other really big races or anything, we will probably see somewhere between 17 and 23% of our population registered turn out to vote. That doesn't even speak to the folks that aren't registered to vote. So the first thing I think all of us can do is encourage our kids, our families, to get out and vote because it matters. I did live as a while for somebody who's like, it doesn't make a difference. You know, they just do what they do. Certainly our state legislature feels that way. You know, it's divided, it's difficult, it's even more caustic than our local city council. But they also do things that affect us every single day, including some of what we're talking about here. We do have local legislators who have been bringing issues about anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic speaking and actions to the floor, or at least to committee. They don't usually move to the floor. But it's something we need to work on, and I think that that makes a difference, because a culture of hate inspires and normalizes hate. I think that we know that as Jews, as people who understand how anti-Semitism works. So to me, whether it's our local level, our school boards who are fighting curriculum wars and, you know, having science-based health education, you know, it's not too far off to think about when people used to measure skulls to see who we were different from other people. I think it's really important that we focus on learning things that are real, that we elect people who understand science and who are committed to finding connections to be able to move us forward. So I don't know, maybe a little bit of a soapbox, but that's a lot in that question.
I could not have scripted this any better if I had tried. I'll do a little plug. There will be a slide of resources up shortly when we wrap up, and I'll do a plug for the JCRC, for the Jewish Community Relations Council, because one of the things that we have identified as sort of the biggest risk, biggest threat, and biggest opportunity are threats to a civil society and the lack of an engaged and informed electorate. And how do we put those resources in people's hands? Because voting does matter. Voting, I mean, we're getting to a place where school board elections and school board governance matters more to the general population than it maybe ever has. And that's a conversation for another time. But there are resources. There is a wonderful organization in Arizona called Civic Engagement Beyond Voting, CEBV.org, that will facilitate your request to speak at the state level, that will help you track bills and their passage through the House, and. So, you know, League of Women Voters, all sorts of amazing resources that we're happy to share with you. All right, just a couple more. And so I think there is a question about Holocaust education in Arizona. Arizona, only in the last couple years, does now have mandated Holocaust ed twice in the not K through 12, but once in middle school and once in high school. staff and docents and educators at the Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center were involved in developing that curriculum. And one of the largest demographics, largest groups that we see at the Tucson Museum are school groups. And that number is increasing. Like, we are up above pre-pandemic levels, which is really amazing. And so that is one local resource. I'm going to do maybe just two more questions, one for Paul, since he's been sitting here so patiently. Have you ever had to bring Tucson police in for any incident that you've dealt with in the Jewish community?
Yeah, we actually, Chelsea and I frequently work with all the law enforcement agencies. There's a lot of reasons why that question might be asked, and people go, well, why didn't we know about this? Or why didn't we know about that? Not everything becomes public, and a lot of the things that we do a lot of things behind the scenes. And to be honest with you, there's a massive amount that your police department does behind the scenes. There's a lot of times that your police department is engaged with us that's all designed to improve our safety and security. So yes, we work with the police department. It wasn't but about a week ago that we had a really good meeting with the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI reference incidents that we had been working within the community. So for us to be security directors is great. We're very happy that there's that level. We're extremely happy that we have a partnership not only with the Tucson Police Department, but with the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the Oro Valley Police Department, the Marana Police Department, the FBI, the United States Marshals, the list goes on, and we work with them all. And that's only a fraction of the layer that we really need. Everybody in this room as a collective whole is much bigger than all of those agencies combined. And that's really what we need in terms of our interaction. There's not one of us who's as strong as all of us, and law enforcement's great, but they don't function well without everybody else being part of this process. And I think that's a huge thing. That whole see something, say something is greater in this realm than any physical barrier that we build. I know there's always in this community going to be the difference and the battle between, do we make it really, really secure, or do we have it open and welcoming? That is a huge challenge. But in all of those things, what we really need is our community to be informed, for our community to communicate, and our community to communicate on a broader scale. It wasn't but just a few days ago that a mass shooting, or what was believed to be a mass shooting, was prevented by somebody seeing something on a social media account and reporting it to the police. And this happened in West Virginia, where the police actually contacted the bad guy in the church as he was getting ready to enter and stopped an event from happening. That didn't happen because your law enforcement was well in advance and so much further ahead of the rest of the world. That happened because somebody who had an idea of what didn't look right reported it. And I think that's a massive key. And I'll give shouts out because we got the information, Chelsea and I got the information, not from law enforcement in West Virginia or the FBI, but from a member of our community who sent a message to both Chelsea and I and said, I don't know if you guys have seen this story yet, but it is an excellent example of see something, say something. And we immediately tried to look at it, and we're like, oh, it's behind a paywall, so we can't see the story. 3 minutes later, I had screenshots sent to my cell phone of the individual pulling up the picture, snapping a picture of it, scrolling down, snapping the next picture, and sending it on. Our people are our greatest asset. whether they're in law enforcement or whether the person who's walking into synagogue sees something that's not right and decides to do something about it. And if I can leave you with anything, it's you don't have to have a doctoral degree in behavioral science to know what doesn't look right. And when it doesn't look right, you need to follow up with that. That's better than any armed guard. It's better than any physical barrier. It's the reality of how people function.
Thank you. I think that's a wonderful place to wrap this up. I just want to acknowledge one card that came up that says, I want to emphasize the importance of the Judaic Studies program at the U of A, which David heads, as a resource for education about Jews, Judaism, and Israel. I can't thank enough our panelists. I love the different perspectives and all that you brought to this evening. This was really lovely. Our thanks to Todd Rockhoff and the staff of the Tucson J, and to our event sponsors who are making the Lakin Lecture Series possible. Thank you to the Tucson Jewish Museum and Holocaust Center Board and the JCRC Advisory Committee, and any omissions are mine. Thank you all so much for being here, both in person and at home. And as I mentioned, please, on your way out, get the information on the next 2 lectures in this series, because so far, I think, they've been wonderful. Thank you all so very much.